All right, welcome to Gathering Folds. Today we are looking at framing, and specifically why I frame my tessellations this way and how you can too. So this is an acrylic sandwich that's held together by binding screws, and the big feature of this style of framing is that you can backlight. So you can have the pattern show up in this much more compelling way for free, basically. You don't have to play with any wires or batteries. You can just hang this sandwich in a window on the hanging cord and get your backlighting from the sun. So first I'm going to walk through some alternative methods for framing tessellations, and then I'm going to walk you through the exact steps and materials that I use to frame like this. So first up, we have shadow boxes, and this particular piece is fabric. You can see it's fluffy, and I stitched it onto a piece of cardstock that I inserted into the back of this wooden shadow box. This one I can't access from the back, and there's no front covering, so everything is super accessible. And I just put in the sawtooth hanger on one side of it. You can really look at these from any orientation. Like, you shouldn't be able to tell which side the sawtooth hanger is on, but there is one particular place to hang it. And then moving on to another shadow box. This one you can see does have a front covering. And this one's actually with glass, so it's very heavy. And what I did is I took multiple of these frames and excuse me, I took a second pane of glass and put it behind the piece. So I don't just have a front cover, I also have one immediately behind. I glued the piece to the back panel of glass to make sure that it stayed centered. And I have spacers on the inside because this was assembled from the back. So you have your front pane of glass, you center and glue your tessellation to the back pane of glass and put that in, put your spacers in, put the back on, make sure it's all fastened and secured, and then you can have a hanging wire to get that hung in place. And so neither of those two shadow box options lets you backlight unless you stick electronics inside of that second option. Here I have a wall offset mount, and this is not really installed yet. So this would have to be screwed into a wall. So you would need 4 screw holes in very precise locations. And again, if you wanted to backlight, you would need to deal with wires and batteries and whatever other lights. So this is a really finicky way of getting your tessellations on the wall. And it's one that I've really moved away from because it would require putting holes in the wall very precisely. And that's just not something that everyone's prepared to do. So what I do now is I take 2 panes of acrylic, and they come with paper on either side. So you peel that off to see the clear, the shiny. You peel that off on both sides, and the first thing I do after I've peeled it is do some anti-static cleaning. So I've got this plexiglass cleaner, acrylic and plastic cleaner. It's anti-static, and that's really important because dust attracts to these peeled pieces like crazy. And even with the cleaner, it gets a little bit interesting. But at least this way, if I do get fingerprints on this, I can just spray it and clean it, or like take a dust rag to it, however you want to do that. So once I have my pieces peeled and cleaned, what I'm going to do is lay out a towel on my desk. And I'm going to have my peeled and cleaned pieces of acrylic. I'm going to have one piece sitting on that towel. I'm going to put my origami tessellation in there face down. So there is a slight distinction between the two sides, and that's which side has the screw holes. This one you can hang from either side, and most people are never going to notice the screw holes. But for me personally, I like this nice flat dot, so that's the side that I want for my favorite side. Now my favorite may not be everybody's favorite, but that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to put this down, I'm going to put the tessellation face down and get out a ruler, make sure that the center is lining up with the corners. And then I'll put my second piece of acrylic very carefully on top and get out my binding screws. And I've got links to the exact binding screws that I use down in the description. So these binding screws have two ends. I think it's commonly called a male end and a female end. You can guess which is which. And so we've got this flat top, a bit of a lip around it, and then the receiving end. And then we have this threaded kind of little bolt with a Phillips head on the other side. And so what I'll do with my framing is I'll use those screws, and I'll also use some nylon washers. This is to make sure that I'm fully compressing this acrylic sandwich. So, and this I do off the edge of my table, but with the camera, I'm doing it on top of the table right now. So I'll have the sandwich, I'll put the flat end up from the bottom. I'll add my nylon washer, and then I'll put in my top screw, and I'll just spin it down until I have 4 of them in place. And then the last 2, when I am getting ready, I'll cut a length of this hanging cord, and this also is linked in the description. So I'll cut maybe 2.5 times the length of an edge of the hexagon. You can see this is the amount of cord. Zoom out so that's a little bit easier to see. This is the length of cord for this size of hexagon. And I'll tie a knot around the part that's going to be screwed in. And the way that I tie that, let me pull some out here and just snip that off. The way I tie the knot, and this is not necessarily the perfect knot, there's a lot of different knots. And I'm seeing in the chat, what happens when the glass falls? That's an excellent question, and another reason why I use acrylic, because it's very resistant to breaking. It's mostly shatterproof. So the glass in the shadow box, that would break if you drop it, but I have dropped these. I've had them fall off of things like when a suction cup fails, and they do not break. And so if you take your cord, and I know this cord is pretty invisible, but that's one of the perks of using it, so you don't see it later. And I'm going to fold it over with maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches tail. I'm going to hold on to that tail and wind the loop end a couple times. Then I'm going to take that tail end, and this works better if your hands are really clean and not greasy. I'm going to take the tail end back through the loop, pulling the loop tight around that screw. And now, since I pulled it tight, zoom in on that, I have the cord wrapping around itself, and this is a very stable knot. I can let go of it, it's staying in place, and it has this thicker part under the lip of the screw. So then when I screw it all together, that's going to be pinching the knot, holding it in place, and then any excess tail I can clip off with a toenail trimmer. And so that is my process for framing tessellations these days. And once I have all of the screws in place, I'll go back and like really hold on to each screw and tighten it the rest of the way. Now, when I'm doing a lot of these, I use a screwdriver with some mechanical assistance, saves the elbows. But this is holding on really firmly, and with 6 of them, that tessellation isn't going anywhere. Like, I'm pushing differentially on these different layers of the sandwich, and it's going nowhere. So I don't even have to add any glue as long as I use the nylon washers. And one little caveat is I usually don't use the nylon washers on the screws with the hanging cord because it already has extra thickness added in. But I do use them in all of the others. And again, the ones I use are the ones linked in the description. And those are affiliate links, so if you do choose to buy, I'll get a couple cents from that at no extra cost to you. And so these nylon washers work really well with these particular screws. They are very close in size to both. So what we're working around here is it's got to fit around the lower post, and it's got to be mostly inside of the upper post. And it's got to not be a color that's super noticeable. And so this is the one nylon washer I've found that's exactly that appropriate size. This is not something that was available at my local hardware store. So yeah, that's really all that's going on with the framing. And one more thing, where to get the acrylic hexagons. So I have also linked in the description a free resource that I've put together of how to get your own acrylic hexagons, which is a bunch of SVG files that I've made for my own use. These are the ones that I use to order my hexagons. And they're super useful for using to cut out your paper in hexagons. One thing that I'll say is typically the size that you start with is not quite the same size that I would frame with. So this hexagon has, I want to say, 5 inches on each edge. The starting paper for this piece had 7 inches on each edge, so about that long. Or I can just grab one from my stack over here. The starting paper was this size. And so it's useful to have a variety of sizes of hexagons, and I do have a file that has like one of each size that I commonly use. And the large sizes I use for cutting, the smallest sizes I also use for cutting, but the middle 2 sizes I use for framing. And if you don't want to go through the hassle of ordering from the manufacturer yourself, I do have small and medium hexagons. And right now it's set up as a small and a medium hexagon in a bundle. And if you get 2 of those, then you would get 2 each small, 2 each medium. And you would be able to frame a small one, frame a medium one. You can also always reach out to me on my contact page if you want a specific number, a specific quantity of a specific size, and I'll work with you on getting that in place. And one of the reasons why it's beneficial to go through me instead of the manufacturer is for small quantities, the manufacturer charges quite a lot. And since I'm ordering in bulk quantities, I can sell them at a reasonable price. So that's all for this video on framing. I hope you enjoy and take a shot at framing your own origami tessellations or whatever else you'd like to see backlit also. Happy folding, happy framing, and I'll